Good afternoon. My name is Jim Conlan, and welcome to the latest edition of our Cult Classic TV series, where we look back on TV movies and TV series and what have been deemed to be cult classic. What cult classic means, they stand the test of time, and they have an impact on generations throughout the decades. So we look back on TV series from the 80s, the 70s, the 90s, the 2000s. They're still relevant. That are still showing on our TV in the present day all over across Ireland and the UK. And this week's edition, we're looking back on a phenomenon as such in terms of the original sort of vampire type, original sort of sci-fi action drama sort of teen series that has been very prevalent throughout the last sort of generations. But it all started with a sort of a mid-summer sort of teenage girl called Buffy Summers, and she played Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I'm delighted to be joined by one of the stars of that show. He played the character Spike, a vampire that throughout the series had his moments of bad, had his moments of good, but also his righteousness good came through the end. The one and only James Marsters. James, delighted to have you on the show, first of all. And does it almost feel like yesterday that you're on the set with Sarah Michelle Gellar shooting Buffy, or do you have to cast your mind back now and think about those sort of days and think to yourself, well, that's nearly 20 years ago now at this stage?
Yeah, I'm getting old enough that time is going very quickly, and in some ways it does feel very fresh. But I've had a full life. There's a lot has gone on between those years, and so in some ways it does feel like it's been a little while. I'll be honest. My kids were barely walking when we started, and they're in college now, so it's been a little while. But yeah, the memories are fresh.
And James, just on it, when you set off in that sort of venture, I suppose little did you know, would you get one season, let alone the amount of seasons that she got at that sort of time. What were your expectations, your initial expectations? Did you feel that you had a hit on your hands straight from the off in terms of the first sort of season, or when did it dawn to you personally that this is going to be around for a while?
I forget when this was, Jim, but I remember telling the cast that we may be talking about this scene, like it was like 3:00 in the morning, and I said, we may be talking about this scene for the rest of our lives. We should bring it. We really need to bring it. Can I get anybody coffee? I was a Star Trek fan. I kind of still am, but very much when I was younger. And there was something about, this is the original Star Trek. All the other ones are good too. But there was something about that world that, even though I knew the plot, even though I knew the dialogue, I still wanted to go back to that world. And I really was thinking that we were making a show that was the same. There was something delightful about it. I think if something interesting or horrifying or funny or in some ways delightful happens with enough regularity, like every 3 to 4 seconds, then it starts popping. And you want to just go back. And it doesn't really matter how many times you've eaten chocolate cake. You want to go have some more chocolate cake, even though you know what it tastes like.
And James, if memory serves me correctly, your character was only supposed to be a recurrent sort of character initially in terms of the first sort of season. But obviously Spike left his mark, and there was something the writers and directors saw that brought you back sort of full time. So your initial expectations when you came on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, did you think to yourself, I'm going to be on here for maybe 4 or 5 episodes and move on to the next sort of gig and next opportunity?
Yeah, they told me I was going to be around for 5 to 10 episodes.
Okay.
And I thought, well, I want 10. I was very poor at this time. I'd moved down to Los Angeles because I'd become a father, and I needed to pay for doctors and diapers, etc. And they were paying me more than I'd ever made in my life. And so I was initially in the season 2, which is the one that I came in first. I was just trying to not get killed off after 5 episodes. And then in season 3, they only had me in for one episode, which sometimes they do with popular characters that are not going to necessarily be a regular. They'll just bring them back for interest. But then in season 4, they lost Cordelia to Angel. There was a spinoff called Angel, and she went over to be a series regular over there. Cordelia was the character in Buffy that would say, Buffy, you're stupid. We're all about to die. And that was her function. And they lost that kind of character. And I think Sarah told me that she's the one that suggested that the new one be me. So in a way, I owe it all to Cordelia and to Sarah.
And James, in terms of Sarah, working with Sarah off the bat, obviously Buffy the Vampire Slayer made her famous all over the sort of world, as sort of such as that. Did she sort of liken that fame initially in terms of being associated to that character, and what was her initial sort of intake on it? And was she very much in terms of the show, was she easy to work with in terms of on set and on demand? So obviously she was carrying the show. People would say she was carrying the show, the weight of the expectations of trying to make a success on her shoulders.
It was irritating working with Sarah, I'll have to be honest with you, Joe. She could memorize her lines within seconds. Like we'd be called to set. I'd go over to her trailer and we'd walk over to the set together, and she would have her script with her, and we would be having a conversation about the day. And she'd glance down and she said, "One moment, James." She just glanced. Yeah, what were you saying? About that long. And I said, "Did you just memorize your lines?" She's like, "Yeah." Like, damn you. I waited up, 2 hours last night to memorize mine. But she came from daytime drama where you do another hour episode every day. And so she got the facility for memorizing lines really quickly. She always on time, always hit her marks, always knew her lines. And, you said the weight of the show. There were the expectations, of course, but there was just the workload. We shot, most television shows shoot for 12 hours a day. That's very, very normal, because after 12 hours, you have to pay the crew double. It's called golden time. So they don't do that. So it's like, get your shots in 12 hours. We never went 12 hours. It was 14 to 16 was normal. 18 was quite often, and 20 happened not irregularly at all. So we were working 12 to 20 hours a day. And she, I got really tired. And I wasn't in that many scenes. She was in almost every single scene. And I have to think, if it had been someone other than Sarah Michelle Gellar, I don't know if the show would have been able to go for 7 years. I think a lot of other people, myself included, might have just crumbled under that kind of workload. Lack of sleep will get you. I've done TV series where you do 8 episodes a year, and the cast starts complaining about being tired. I'm like, you don't even know what tired feels like, man. When you're doing 22 a year, then you start to find out. So Sarah was absolutely fabulous. She always was perky and energetic, and I just couldn't figure out how she did that. I would just go lay down. They would say, "Cast, you can, go to your trailer." I would just go backstage and just lay down, just close my eyes, try to save energy.
And James, in terms of your character, Spike, I suppose the directors and the producers always kept you guessing in terms of what sort of role he would take on, in terms of, they say in the wrestling, there's the heel and there's the face. The face is the good guy and the heel is the bad guy. Spike was constantly switching between both sides, playing both sorts of divides. I suppose you sort of never knew what was in store for him, did you? Or did you get a sense maybe, well, this is what he'll be like for this season, but the following season we could see a different, complete personality change altogether?
Yeah, there was a lot of surprises. In general, I was maybe the only one that could tell where the series was going in general. And I remember one of the writers came up to me and said, "How do you do that? How do you know? Everyone's guessing. We have to have a clampdown on information, but you just always know. How do you doing that?" And I said, "Well, it's very easy. You just take what a perfectly good writer would do the opposite, and make it amazing." That's the secret. And they were like, oh, who told you the secret? Like, well, it's kind of obvious. But with regards to Spike, I had a blind spot, and I often was surprised. Like I remember people would ask me, you know, before Spike was a vampire, what kind of guy was he? It was like, oh, he's a badass, obviously. And then a script came out where we met William, who was Spike before Spike. And it couldn't have been more different, you know, he wasn't Spike at all. I never saw coming the idea that Buffy and Spike would actually get together. I never saw that at all. I always thought that it would be a good idea to have Spike fall in love with Buffy, have Buffy, of course, not fall in love with Spike, but Spike try to win her love to comedic or horrifying effect. And I thought that we could run with that for a very long time because the whole problem once I got to be a regular in season 4 was, how do you get Spike to stop trying to kill Buffy? Because if he keeps trying to kill her, he obviously has to fail, and that's going to be like Scooby-Doo before you know it. It's going to get cheesy. So how do you get him to stop trying? And that was my idea. But I never expected that she would kind of get a crush on him. Still don't understand. Yeah.
And James, you mentioned there the spin-off in Angel, and obviously Buffy opened up new horizons for the likes of David Boreanaz. You mentioned Cordelia's sort of character, Eliza Dushkin, sort of cross between both sort of worlds as well. So obviously your character crossed the divide as well in terms of once or twice onto Angel sort of such as well. So did you sort of feel that they were overloading with characters on Buffy, that it was creating opportunities to tell sort of different stories? And do you think it was wise to maybe to break and maybe create that a sort of Angel sort of show as well? Maybe it made Buffy that bit more popular as well, because we didn't have multiple characters running for multiple seasons.
Yeah, you know, I think there was so much crossover because that was, I don't know, that like Buffy was a show that kind of broke the mold as far as telling longer term stories. When we were filming, what most shows were doing was just standalone episodes where the story would be resolved by the end of the episode. We didn't do that, obviously. It's very common now, but it really wasn't back then. And so I think finding larger connections between episodes is just the instinct of the show and of the writers. And I think it's not surprising that if there was going to be a spinoff, they would want those connections between the shows as well. And so, yeah, it makes sense that a lot of it's kind of cross-pollinated. Yeah.
And James, just in terms of the budget and the production behind Buffy the Vampire Slayer, obviously as the seasons went on, I imagine the budget and the production scales went up and up and up in terms of what was available to you. But do you remember walking on set the very first time and seeing the set? Was it well established? Was it well sort of crew? And maybe as the seasons went on, did the sort of the sets that you had, were they bigger, bad, or bolder?
You know, the big thing I remember is that we were shooting in 16 millimeter the first season. Back then, before digital cameras, we were shooting on film, and there's 8 millimeter, 16, and then film is 32. And most television shows film in 32, but it's much cheaper for development of film. You send it out to be developed and stuff. It's just cheaper to do smaller stock. And that's why in season 1 and 2, you can see the colors are kind of washed out. It looks a little grainy. That's why. I feel like everything was right at the top of the game from my very first episode, because really storytelling doesn't need a lot of money necessarily. It's nice, but you can tell really good stories without it. And that's what they were doing when I first got on the show. But they were also doing something really smart. They were building their own backlot slowly over the seasons, so that they could do exteriors in Sunnydale and not have to go out and rent a street.
Okay.
And they just could do it right behind the sound stages. And year after year, they just set aside some of the budget for the whole year to build Sunnydale. And by the time, I guess it was by season 6, there was a main street with 2 offshoots. And yeah, and it was a really good backlot by the end of it. And I think that's why you probably saw it looked like it started to look like a more expensive show, but that's because they've been investing since the very beginning in that.
And James, in terms of the cast and the crew, where you mentioned there about the long hours, spending maybe 17 to 18 hours a day working, and obviously seasons, I imagine, were maybe 7, 8 months of a year, and you're probably with that same sort of people in that sort of same location. Probably can't get on to other commitments in terms of other sort of one-off movies or TV series or guest appearances, because you're committed to that sort of project. Do you sort of form a tight-knit bond that has stayed long after Buffy the Vampire Slayer finished?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I mean, they're family. Like I've seen the best and the worst in all of them, except for Tony Head, who doesn't seem to have a bad side at all. And they've seen the best and the worst of me, and I love them like family, you know. And that creates a level of trust and a level of bonding that you can't get any other way than going through an intense experience like that with somebody. But yeah, Tony was the rock. He's my favorite cast member. Tony taught me everything I know about film acting, actually. I came down to Los Angeles having done a lot of theater. I'd done like 100 plays, and I was pretty stagey. I was a little over the top in the beginning, and I think I got away with it because I was playing a vampire. But I started to notice that the other characters were more believable and more subtle than I was. And I remember when I first shot with Tony Head, I thought, would you wake up, man? Like, can I get you a cup of coffee? Because I'm going to mop the stage with you. I'm going to take this scene right out from under you. And when I saw the scene, the only character I was interested in was Tony. I didn't want to watch Spike. The only real human, all the subtlety, the immediacy was in Giles. And I realized I had a lot to learn. So I would come to the set and watch him, even when I wasn't needed, I wasn't in the scene. I would just sit on a box and watch him work. And that's, yeah.
And James, obviously back then in the early sort of 90s with Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the sort of when you look now and you look at the current type of TV sort of vampire sort of sci-fi shows, like Van Helsing, The Walking Dead, sort of stuff like that. Do you see any sort of similarities that you can say, right, did you trace back, maybe they got that from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, or you can see some sort of hallmarks, some what he did in terms of pioneering that maybe other sort of vampire sort of flicks have followed on from?
I have to be careful, Jim, because I'm a gamer. And so if we were talking about video games, I could go into detail about all the new games and for years. And so I haven't seen that much television. So I could talk about this, but I don't know if it's going to come from a lot of experience. What I do know is that Buffy was extraordinarily well written. And I think that it proved that you could tell serious stories and have complex characters that are as complex and nuanced as you find in straight dramas. I think that Buffy was one of the first shows to treat the characters with as much respect as characters in dramas were being treated, or cop shows or doctors.
And James, one thing that strikes me, I've been doing this sort of series for a long time now in terms of looking back at cult classics. And when we look at I speak to actors maybe from the 70s or the 80s who are in sort of TV series, they keep telling me like every week they open the mail, the royalties come in, the show's been shown for the first time in sort of Paraguay or Bangkok or Thailand or something like that, and they're still sort of amazed by the fact, wow, this has been shown in Thailand or Chile or somewhere around the sort of world. And the sort of, does that sort of surprise you at this stage? Has that been a regular sort of occurrence to you when throughout the years, still seeing that or fan mail or basically internet mail from people all over the world talking about the Spike character 20 years on, watching it maybe for the first time? Does it sort of resonate to you that you'll always be associated with that character?
I kind of knew it when we were filming.
Okay.
I thought that, I don't know, I am kind of a Buffy fan, in that I'm a fan of the writing. I'm a fan of the production. I feel like the writing was some of the best I've ever seen. I think that the acting was good enough, the acting was good enough not to ruin the writing, which is actually takes pretty good acting, because the writing was really very good. But the star of the show is the writing. But it was so fabulous that even when we were filming, I was like, we're touching the nerve of the world right now. And we were hearing, that people in Europe and the UK were watching, and Australia, Canada. I was surprised when a Baltic state made postage stamps, federal postage stamps out of the characters. I was like, well, that's amazing. I guess the surprise was that Japan wasn't showing it. I thought that Japan would eat it up like tofu, but it may have been shown by now. But while we were filming, I heard that they weren't showing it at all in Japan. I was like, that's confusing to me. Yeah.
Okay. And James, I suppose lastly, before I let you go, just two final questions for you. The second sort of last question, as a cast, maybe, when's the last time you've actually met up in a room, or did you do a sort of a 10-year reunion or 20-year reunion as sort of such? And when's the last time that you've been in the room with 3 or 4 of the cast members from Buffy the Vampire Slayer?
Well, I mean, the first question is, when have I been in the same room with anybody? I mean, I've been so careful with the pandemic. It's been a few years since I've been hanging out in public. No, that's just kidding. I actually did some cons before Omicron hit. We generally see each other for cons. I text with Sarah. We do a little competition bragging about our kids together. It was amazing. What was the publication? There was a magazine that did a photo shoot for both Angel and Buffy for the 10-year anniversary. Was it 10? God, I don't know. Maybe it was 10. But it brought us all together again at the same time in the same room. That was really fabulous. But yeah, I was just emailing Juliet Landau the other week. So we keep in touch.
Keep in touch. And James, finally, a question for you now. If you were to put the character Spike in a sort of an encyclopedia of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and during his synopsis, in terms of what I was describing the character, they left 2 blank sentences underneath his name. What would James Marsters, who have played the role of Spike, what would you like those 2 sentences to read? It's not an epitaph as such. I suppose an epitaph would be a good sort of way, because he is a vampire, so he is technically dead. So that would be actually a good thing to have on his gravestone. But if you were to say those 2 sentences, what would you like those 2 sentences to read?
Oh man, Spike, a interminable bad boy who was redeemed by love.
Spike, an interminable bad boy who's redeemed by love. James Marsters, an absolute pleasure talking to you this evening on the airwaves as we look back this week's cult classic special feature, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, obviously still being shown all around the world today. gathering new audience, gathering new fans from different generations, different people watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer for the first time that weren't even born when the show was in production, and a whole new following. It stood the test of time. No doubt it will be around for another 10 or 20 years, and the character Spike and obviously the actor James Marsters who played him will always be associated that sort of role. This week's special feature, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, truly a cult classic TV series. James Marsters, an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Jim.
Cheers. Take care, James.
Right on, man. Have a good one.
Cheers.